Hello everyone, I am back with another video. Today talking all things PlayStation 4. We're going to be going over my top 25 games for the system. We'll be splitting this into two parts. So part one will be games 25 through 11, and then in about a week's time, I'll release my top 10 games for the system. But before we get into the list itself, I first just have to shout out how incredible a console generation this was for PlayStation. So many genres well represented. I feel like they really came into their own with their first party stuff like Uncharted, Bloodborne, Death Stranding, Ghost of Tsushima, The Last of Us Part 2. There was so many great exclusive titles, and it's also where I played most of my third party stuff. As you can see, I have quite the library of PlayStation 4 games behind me, but I still feel like I've only scratched the surface, and it's quickly... Can I say this definitively yet? I feel like this is surpassing my love of the PlayStation 2 and taking that #1 spot as my favorite console ever. Now, I think it goes without saying that this is my list. We're gonna have fun with this. So if some of your favorite PlayStation 4 games aren't here, or maybe I didn't rank them as high as you'd like, please drop me a comment below. Let me know what are some of your favorite PlayStation 4 games, because there's plenty of stuff that I've yet to play, like I said earlier. Now, the last thing we have to do before jumping into the list itself is talk through the guardrails, the rules that I made for myself when creating this list of 25 games. The first one was no remasters for games that I've played on a prior generation, a prior console. Great example of that would be the Nathan Drake collection. Uncharted 1 through 3, played that on PS3, not going to be included here. The second rule is any game that came out on the PlayStation 4 and 5 wouldn't be eligible. So Miles Morales, Kena Bridge of Spirits, God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, those wouldn't be eligible for this list. And then lastly, any games that I haven't played yet, okay? Any games that I haven't finished wouldn't be possible. There are some really big heavy hitters that I have yet to play, like Red Dead Redemption 2, Persona 5 Royal, a lot of the Yakuza games, Death Stranding. Those types of games are also not going to be represented because I haven't played them. And with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get started talking through my top 25 PlayStation 4 games.
It wouldn't be a top games list without showing some love to open world Ubisoft games. I've been a big Far Cry fan ever since 3, like a lot of people, but while mainline games have repeated the formula of an open world, iconic villain, they kinda all feel the same. Then there was Far Cry Primal, where instead of being set on a current day tropical island, you're in 10,000 BC playing as this lone hunter recently separated from his tribe. You'll check the normal Far Cry boxes like clearing outposts, hunting wild animals to craft new gear, but also, unlike previous Far Cry games, you'll do it in a prehistoric environment surrounded by woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats, where you'll use a bow and arrow, rocks, and even beehives to attack your enemies instead of guns and grenades. It not only stands among the other Far Cry games as being something truly unique, it's also a blast to play and just doesn't get enough love nowadays. I often talk about not seeing enough 3D platformers nowadays when compared to the PS2 era, but there are still some great gems during this console generation. One of my favorites is New Super Lucky's Tale. You play as this adorable little fox making your way through a variety of colorful worlds with plenty of collectibles to find along the way, including coins that you can use to purchase new outfits for Lucky to wear. It doesn't present too much in the way of challenge, though there are these sliding puzzle levels between the normal traditional A to B levels that were honestly more annoying than fun, but never too distracting from where Lucky shines brightest elsewhere in the game. If you're a fan of simple 3D platformers with few gimmicks, where you have your double jump and your spin attack, you need to give New Super Lucky's Tale a try. It's honestly one of the best 3D platformers of the modern era that isn't named Mario. I've been a tremendous fan of the Hot Shots Golf series dating back to the PlayStation 2, so I was thrilled when we got another entry on the PlayStation 4 called Everybody's Golf, which the series has been known by in Japan since it got its start on the PlayStation 1. The 3-button click system to hit your ball still works so well, and I often fall into that trap of just one more round when playing this game. But what was unique about Everybody's Golf was the ability to create your own character. As you play rounds and earn more money, you'll unlock plenty of clothes, accessories, and clubs that you can then purchase to outfit your character. There's even a fun hub area to run around in between matches where you can interact with other NPCs, ride a golf cart around, and even fish. Even if you haven't played a Hot Shots Golf or Mario Golf type of game before, this one is pretty newcomer friendly and I cannot recommend it enough. I think I'm in the minority in saying that I like Ni no Kuni 2 Revenant Kingdom quite a bit more than Wrath of the White Witch. I just didn't enjoy the Pokemon-like battle system of that first game for some reason, but I really enjoyed the Tales of-like action RPG battle system of this second game. Set hundreds of years after Wrath of the White Witch, this young man named Evan is set to take the throne as king, but after some events that I won't spoil, he is forced to flee and establish a kingdom of his own. That's where this game is at its best. Between the smooth action RPG combat, you'll also have these strange yet surprisingly fun RTS-style combat sequences. And as the name of the game sort of implies, Revenant Kingdom, you'll build and manage a kingdom of your own in a very refined and almost simplified version of something like SimCity. It's an incredibly addicting gameplay loop, even if the story isn't anything to write home about. Even if you haven't played the first Ni no Kuni, there's really no connection story-wise, so you can jump right into this game and enjoy its Studio Ghibli-inspired world without missing a beat. I might be cheating a little bit, including Theatrhythm Final Bar Line on my list since it just recently released, but I know this will be one of my most consistently played PS4 games for years to come. I loved my time with the original and Curtain Call on 3DS, and I was thrilled to discover just how well this game controls with a controller and analog stick versus the 3DS and stylus. With over 385 songs to play across the entirety of the mainline Final Fantasy franchise, including songs from plenty of spin-off titles like Mystic Quest and Chocobo Dungeon, it's not only the definitive Theatrhythm experience, I think it's one of the best rhythm games to date. The I'll just play one more song often turns into 10 to 15 more, and it's always a blast mixing and matching different party members to level them up and collect a ton of character cards at the end of each song. If you're like me and you want to play more Final Fantasy games, but you just can't justify the time sink, pick up Final Bar Line. It's the perfect way to jump into these worlds and experience the music that's been bringing them to life for so many years. Prior to playing Final Fantasy XVI, which I'm still in the middle of at the time of this recording, I think 15 would have made it higher on my top 25 PlayStation 4 game list. But 16's combat system, story, and characters is so much better than 15 in just about every way. It's worth noting though that I played 15 in 2020 at the peak of the pandemic where we couldn't go anywhere. So even if I couldn't go on a road trip vacation with my friends in real life, Final Fantasy 15 kind of afforded me that luxury. I also really like the heaviness of the combat that reminded me quite a bit of Monster Hunter, exploring the open world and going out to complete one of its many side quests, and maybe contrary to most people's opinion, I enjoyed the Roadtrip vibe. Getting into the car, listening to some iconic Final Fantasy tunes, and waiting until I got to my next destination was always a treat for me. Sure, the combat might not be as good as 16, and you need to watch a movie to fully understand the story, but back in 2020, that never really disrupted my enjoyment playing it. It's a solid Final Fantasy game that, like many in the post-Final Fantasy X era, seems to get quite a bit more hate than is actually warranted. Respawn Entertainment's Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order took me and my brother-in-law by surprise back in 2019, so much for me that it was my 2019 Game of the Year. It felt so refreshing to play a new Star Wars game that wasn't riddled with microtransactions, and also one that actually had a compelling story set between the events of Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. I genuinely cared about the main protagonist Cal Kestis and the supporting cast of characters. Not to mention, this game, more than any Star Wars game that came before it, truly makes you feel like a Jedi. Whether wielding a lightsaber or using the Force, the Dark Souls-like combat system is so satisfying to master, and in Dark Souls-like fashion, can be humbling at times with its difficulty. Even after playing the sequel, Jedi Survivor, Fallen Order is still my favorite in this supposed trilogy, and I cannot wait to see how Cal's story continues to unfold in future installments. On the subject of surprises, I couldn't believe how much I fell in love with Wolfenstein: The New Order when I played it back in 2018. Having no experience with the prior Wolfenstein games, I was first taken back by how interesting the story was and invested I became in the story of the Terminator impersonator BJ Blazkowicz. Ultimately, the story can be boiled down to you playing as war veteran BJ and his efforts to stop the Nazis from taking over the world. But when you pull back the curtain a bit, there's a lot more depth to the character, story, and its supporting cast. The moment-to-moment gameplay is fast, loud, and brutal, as you can dual-wield shotguns and machine guns and take down room upon room of Nazi soldiers. But when I had the most fun is when I would stealthily make my way around each level, silently taking out each officer. Unlike its cousin shooter Doom, Wolfenstein surprisingly allows for both playstyles. If you're looking for a solid first-person shooter, look no further. Wolfenstein: The New Order and its sequel New Colossus are some of the best this console generation, and I cannot wait for Machine Games to release the long-awaited third game, hopefully soon, to conclude this trilogy. Uncharted Lost Legacy takes place 6 to 12 months after the events of Uncharted 4, which we may or may not hear about later, and serves as the perfect bookend to one of my favorite series. Now, it's important to note that Nathan Drake takes a back seat to this adventure, and instead you're playing as Chloe, joined by Nadine Ross, as you both partner up in an unlikely scenario to help prevent a civil war from breaking out in India. What starts out as almost these two stepsisters that are constantly bickering and finding reasons not to get along, ends with a memorable pair of friends working together for the greater good. In normal Uncharted fashion, you'll shoot up a ton of bad guys, solve puzzles, and do plenty of wall climbing, but Lost Legacy still just feels different and stands among the rest of the mainline Uncharted games as feeling distinct and a breath of fresh air, knowing the series isn't solely dependent on Nate to be something special. While the future of Uncharted is a bit of a question mark at this point, I sincerely hope we see more adventures with Chloe and Nadine in the future. Resident Evil 7. My goodness. Still to this day the scariest thing I've ever experienced. Be it movie, TV show, or video game, I think following up the high-octane, over-the-top action, third-person shooter in Resident Evil 6 with a greater emphasis on story, and the game being in the first person was one of the best recoveries for a series I've ever seen with Resident Evil 7. Exploring this creepy house out in Louisiana, trying to figure out what happened to your wife, while simultaneously trying to survive the chaos that this insane family put you through is such a wild ride. I played the entirety of the game sitting next to my dog Scooby because I needed some sense of comfort during the freakier moments. I screamed out loud multiple times, and as strange as it sounds, I loved every minute of it in Resident Evil 7. I also enjoyed its follow-up in Resident Evil Village, and I'm looking forward to what's in store in the presumably third and final installment in this trilogy with RE9. When Telltale's first season of The Walking Dead released back in 2012, it made waves for its episodic story and the dialogue choices you had to make as a player that often led to certain characters dying or others just having negative feelings towards the main protagonist, Lee Everett. It was an incredible, if not heart-wrenching first season to see and influence Lee's decisions in an effort to help keep those around him alive, including a young girl named Clementine. Without going into story spoilers, the series spanned 4 seasons with Clementine being the main protagonist, and seeing her development over the course of those seasons was something truly special, especially as you reflect back on her humble beginnings when she first met Lee at the onset of the zombie apocalypse. I think so many people gave up after playing the first or second season, and admittedly, it never quite reaches those heights again, but it's still such a beautiful story and arc, and I think more people need to play it to completion. If you enjoy point-and-click, interactive adventure games, you have to play The Walking Dead. It's one of the best. For anyone following Guerrilla Games as a developer, you had to do a double take in 2017 when they released a game that didn't feature the Hellghast and wasn't named Killzone. Thankfully, they left that series behind for something far more unique and original and created Horizon Zero Dawn. I've always had a fascination with dinosaurs, so a game where you get to wander a post-apocalyptic United States overrun with mechanical dinosaurs immediately intrigued me. And Aloy quickly became a favorite protagonist of mine, voiced by the supremely talented Ashley Birch, and I loved playing through the story to better understand who Aloy was in this grander story and how the world had become so corrupt and overrun by these machines. The moment-to-moment gameplay also never grows stale, as you continuously find new and unique upgrades for your bow and arrow, which makes hunting the machines all the more enjoyable. Scanning and finding the vulnerability on each machine mid-combat and landing that perfect shot to take it down is just so dang satisfying. Similar to Jedi Fallen Order, I prefer the first game to its sequel, but Forbidden West is also an excellent chapter in Aloy's story, and I'm looking forward to seeing where she goes next. It seems like we waited an eternity for a proper follow-up to Kingdom Hearts 2 that didn't have decimal points or mathematical equations in the title. But in 2019, we finally got Kingdom Hearts 3. As a kid wandering Agrabah and the Pride Lands in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 respectively, I always dreamed I would someday be able to run around with Buzz and Woody in a Toy Story world, and Kingdom Hearts 3 didn't disappoint. With its many memorable Pixar worlds, the return of Donald and Goofy as your primary companions, and arguably the best battle system the series has seen to date, I struggle to think of how Kingdom Hearts 3 could have been much better. With each passing year, I grow fonder for it. While the story took a bit of a backseat in this one, and it's all kind of just squeezed into the final hours, I didn't really mind. Kingdom Hearts 1 is my favorite game ever, and I still don't know what the heck is going on in these games. Kingdom Hearts for me has always been about wandering the world from some of my favorite childhood animated movies, whacking Heartless, and unlocking new Keyblades. Kingdom Hearts 3 did all of that in abundance, and I loved it. I've still never played the original Final Fantasy VII to completion, but I've played enough to at least get a sense for why it's considered one of the best in the franchise. After rolling credits in 7 Remake, it was abundantly clear why people fell in love with this story, its characters, the world, and of course the soundtrack 20 plus years ago. I don't want to mention anything specific at risk of spoiling it, but to be able to see some of those iconic moments play out in glorious HD was truly something special, and even though the turn-based combat was pushed aside in favor of a more traditional action RPG, it's still a blast to play and quite a bit more nuanced than it would seem at the surface. I cannot wait to play Rebirth, assuming it still comes out next year on those 2 discs, and continue to see this treasured classic recreated for longtime fans and newer fans like myself. The Witcher 3 has been one of those backlog titles like Breath of the Wild, Persona 5, or some other absurdly long RPG that's almost too intimidating to even start. But during 2020, when I had nothing but time, it was the perfect opportunity to tackle this beast of a game, and I'm so thankful I did. From the swift, nuanced combat to the riveting story, I quickly discovered that all of the hype surrounding The Witcher 3 was well warranted. It's truly one of the best RPGs I've ever played, and while the main story is incredible in its own right, even more impressive was how carefully crafted and well written the side quests are. Not throwaway fetch quests, but quests that genuinely build upon the story and Geralt's journey in meaningful ways. I know it's a lot to jump into, but just know that when you do, you will not regret it. The Witcher 3 is an absolute masterpiece of a game.
Alright, that is a wrap for part 1 of my top 25 PlayStation 4 games. What did you think? Again, leave me a comment below. Let me know what some of your favorite PS4 games are. And like I said, this is just part 1. We still have part 2 coming, 10 more games to rank and talk about. So if you haven't seen some of your favorites yet, they could be in that next video. So stay tuned for that. Now, the last thing I'll tease is that this is actually a 3-part video series. I also spent over 2 hours getting a list of my 50 favorite PS4 games down to 25, and then I ranked all 25 of that ended up making up this list of games. So once I put out part 2 of this top 25 video, I'll then a week after that release the basically process where I formally ranked all of these games. So if you're into that longer format and hear a little bit more about each of these games and why I love them, you can stay tuned for that as well. But I want to thank all of you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.